Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dave Deptula, Dean of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, and welcome to our panel on Air and Space Warriors Now and Tomorrow. Professional military education, in the broad sense of the term, is critical to ensuring that our airmen and guardians have the knowledge and skills necessary to stay on the leading edge of strategy and tactics. Whether it be flight school, operating or advising at Red Flag, or a fellowship at a place like the Mitchell Institute, these experiences shape our warfighters into the world's best. But professional military education has to be baked into an airman or a guardian's career to give them the opportunity to grow as they progress. Innovative training and education is required to prepare our airmen and guardians for the fights of the future. Today, we have the leaders whose responsibility is just that, training the very best U.S. airmen and guardians possible. Lieutenant General Brian Robinson is commander of Air Education and Training Command. Major General Shawn Bratton is commander of Space Training and Readiness, or STAR Command. And Major General Cunningham is the Air Force Warfare Center commander. So welcome, gentlemen, and thanks for taking the time to be here today. Now, just a little bit about their backgrounds. Prior to command of AETC, General Robinson, also known as Smokey, served as the Deputy Commander of Air Mobility Command, where he was responsible for Transcom's air component. He's a weapons officer and command pilot with over 4,400 hours in airlift and training aircraft. Major General Bratton, also known as Governor, was the first Air National Guardsman to attend the Space Weapons Instructor course at Nellis. Previously, General Bratton was the NORTHCOM Director of Space Forces, commander of the Maryland Air National Guard 175th Cyberspace Operations Group, and Deputy Director of Ops at U.S. Space Command. And as the commander of the U.S. Air Force Warfare Center at Nellis, Major General Cunningham, also known as Basket, oversees Air Force operational testing and tactics development, as well as the advanced training schools, exercises, and venues that are all out there at Nellis. He's the former commander of the Thunderbirds and previously served as Director of Plans, Programs, and Requirements at Headquarters Air Combat Command. So gentlemen, thanks for joining us again today. What I'd like to do is offer you each the opportunity to give a couple of opening remarks, and we'll start with Smokey. So General Robinson.
Sir, thank you very much, and I just want to start with saying thank you and acknowledge the great effort and support from yourself, the Mitchell Institute, and AFA for allowing us to, the directors and the board are allowing us to have this opportunity. And then I'm absolutely honored and humbled to represent the 1st Command here as the thousands of, many tens of thousands of airmen that serve in that capacity and do what we do, but also humbled and honored to be alongside my colleagues here on the stage to talk with you today. You asked about what is it we're getting after today, so I'd like to start with at the broad sense and work a little bit more further and down into detail. But essentially what it comes down to, and you've heard it here many times over already, and you've heard it before coming here, but our airmen are our competitive advantage vis-a-vis the PRC and or Russia or any other significant adversary there. So it starts there. And what I'm really trying to get after with the team that I have working around with me and working with and through is how does AETC leverage every possible touch point it has with our airmen from the time they enter the Air Force, come back for PME, advanced skills training, to make sure that we're pushing them, developing them, recruiting them in the right direction so that they have confidence that they can go forth and help the Air Force return to the great power mindset. Can they be confident and comfortable with the mindset of multi-capable airmen? Are they able to think critically and employ and advise on the concept known as agile combat employment? Are we training them and giving them the talents that they need in that space? And then mostly returning to our roots where the airmen are actually empowered, right? They understand with that training and the repetitions that opportunities they get that they're actually empowered to go forth and do the things, many examples that you heard from there. I'd like to touch on 4 specific things, and perhaps it'll lead into some of the Q&A. Our first most strategic concern that we have is recruiting and retention, but recruiting specifically. We have to figure out how to evolve our approach to recruiting in a way that gets us, that increases the Air and Space Force's value statement to the generation that we want to join our forces. And as was said by the CEO of Google yesterday, if you saw that, they can see themselves contributing to our mission and our why. After that, speaking of the brand, the other piece of that is we have to change the narrative, or evolve the narrative where we come back to talking about the strengths of the brand of the Air Force and the Space Force, and what it is that we're about, what it is that we're going to do, and how they can contribute to advancing air power, space power in the United States of America in this great competition. Below that, the second concern I have is optimizing the efficiencies in the ways that we train and learn or develop learning and training for our airmen, particularly UPT 2.5. That'll be fully operational capable here the first quarter of 23. But then I want to take all that we've learned in that space with the greatness of Det 24 under 19th Air Force and start looking at how we apply that to tech training transformation. You may not know this, I'm sure most of you in this crowd do, but many outside the Air Force especially don't know, but pilot training is like 12% of what we do in terms of what we train and provide. The other 88% is all the other enabling functions, civil engineers, finance, weather, et cetera, et cetera. So we want to figure out how we can take what we learned there. Third point, the inflection points that I see that provide the greatest opportunity for us to transform and help the Air Force achieve its objectives is through Air University, the PME schools, both the officer and enlisted, how we get after that and start getting our folks calibrated in the ways that they can get after understanding the joint warfighting concept and apply that in their daily goings-on and the staffs that they serve on. Second, I think, is our intel school. We've got to get away from sensor to shooter and to get to sensor to decision maker, and that information rides along the warfighting functions, and we need the Joint Task Force commanders, the leaders at every level to understand all those elements as best they can to make the best decisions in the battle and the fight. Underpinning all of that, so I use this last, but it is not by any way, means, or shape the least important. It's the data and the systems approach. We have to be able to access the data, push the data, understand the data with how we train our folks, develop them, deliver learning, understand the competencies that they've gained, how that works in partnership with AFA 1 and SAF-MR in the development side and talent management and putting people in the right places that they contribute the most. We're in a digital age. Conflict is already occurring in the digital age environment. If we get to that point, warfare will occur in a digital age, and we have a very foundational piece as Air Education Training Command in making sure the force is ready for that. So I look forward to the conversation, and thank you for the opportunity.
Very good. John Bratton.
Hey, good afternoon or late morning. Day 3 of AFA. You guys look good out there. Need some energy, so stay alive with us. Yeah. Hey, there's probably a lot of instructors out there, ATC and STARCOM instructors, maybe some recruiters in the room. Thanks to you guys, first and foremost. None of this business goes anywhere without that front line of instructor duty, and we value it in both services, and the Secretary values it. It was clear in his guidance to the promotion board. So shout out to the instructors and the recruiters in the room. Really, we go nowhere without you, so thanks. I'll tell you, it's been a busy year in STARCOM. We're the newest thing in the newest service, 1 year old. We just turned 1 year old, and we have been working hard. Mainly, the first year was about the accession into the force. What does that first 12 months of service look like? And we made, really in partnership with the ATC, some leaps and bounds in basic training and how we onboard people into the service. Great partnerships throughout the enterprise there. Year 2, we're really now looking at that second tranche. How do we get into advanced training? And this is driven, just as General Robinson pointed out, by the threat. They are coming to get us in space, right? Russia and China's capabilities are legitimate threats on orbit, and they're coming to get us in space, not just to deny space, but to defeat the Air Force in air superiority. They think there's a weak link there that they can defeat land forces, air forces, naval forces if they beat us in space. They've seen the advantage that it provides to the joint force, and they're coming after us. And STARCOM's job with a bunch of teammates is prepare the force. How do we get ready for that fight? If the operators succeed or fail, we carry that burden to prepare them properly to engage the threat. And so we're really focused on readiness in this second year, and how do we tie our training events to the readiness of the operational force, and how can I prove that in metrics? What's the range activity we need to build? We're teaming with the Warfare Center on a lot of advanced training activities to make sure that we're not just doing space operations to protect and defend on orbit, but we know that we are protecting and defending on orbit to ensure air, land, sea superiority as well for the joint force. So a lot of focus year 2 in advanced training activities, and I think we'll talk a little bit about that. Just a quick update on sort of what happened in year 1, where we are right now. We're still in a build phase. We have basing activities going on for STARCOM headquarters and its deltas. We're still onboarding civilians, so civilians, come, we're hiring, come talk to us. And building out the force, and that'll go for the next 2 or 3 years. We're still in very much a build phase, and there's still this incredible dependence, I think always will be, on big Air Force. The Space Force is such a small service. We assess about 500 enlisted members per year, about 300 officers a year, just tiny numbers compared to the bigger enterprises and the other services. It lets us do some things in different ways, maybe be more agile, but it also creates an incredible dependency on ATC and Air Force recruiting and all the Air Force services that help us out. And so we're trying to understand that. Where does it make sense to separate and go do our own thing to ensure space superiority for the Joint Force? But there's other places where it absolutely makes sense to stay tied together, and I think we're working with our teammates to work through some of that, and I think we'll probably talk a little bit more about that. I gotta finally give a shout out, STARCOM Squadron of the Year, 3 Tez is here in the house. I saw him, we're real proud of them. They just got that award at our first birthday, first ever Squadron of the Year, so Sumo, good job with the team over there.
John Cunningham?
Thanks, sir. Echo the thanks to AFA for this awesome forum and awesome opportunity and the honor to be up here on this stage with these leaders. What I thought I'd do this morning is just give you, just give you a quick run through of what the Warfare Center is, because sometimes that's not a commonly understood fact, and then talk to you a little bit about our 3 priority efforts in the Warfare Center. So first, we're about 13,000 folks, not only at Nellis in Nevada, but across 20 other states and about 53 other locations. There's only about 55 folks in the headquarters, so by definition, everything that happens in the Warfare Center is really through the wings that make up the Warfare Center. So briefly, the 57th Wing is our advanced training organization headquartered at Nellis. Red Flag and Weapons School are some of the events that many of you would know best there. The 53rd Wing, our operational tests and tactics development organization, doing that not only for ACC, but also Global Strike, headquartered at Eglin. And then also in the Panhandle, the 505th Command and Control Wing. If you take everything the 57th does and the 53rd does, put it together, and then focus on C2, that is what the 505th Command and Control Wing does. So JTAC to JFAC, as it'll often say there. And then our newest organization, also in the Panhandle, is the 350th Spectrum Warfare Wing, focused exclusively on dominance in the electromagnetic spectrum. Been up for about a year there. Blitzing back to Nellis, we've got the 99th Air Base Wing, who does a fantastic job maintaining the installation that makes all the magic possible at Nellis. And then our 2 named organizations, the NTTR, which is a place and also an organization, the Nevada Test and Training Range, responsible for that national asset that exists there in Nevada, and they are also responsible for the Virtual Test and Training Center, which I think we'll get a little bit of a chance to talk to today. And then last but not least, the Air Force Joint Test Program Office, one of our lesser known organizations in the Warfare Center, but does amazing work across the joint community with Air Force sponsored joint tests that are non-material in nature. So across those organizations, we've got 3 priorities. And when I say we've got 3 priorities in the Warfare Center, it requires the synergistic and integrated effects across those wings in order to make them real. So the first is we have a pacing challenge campaign plan. And really what that is all about the operations, activities, and investments that we do within the Warfare Center, making sure that they're laser focused on the pacing challenge that is China. That is fundamental and underlies everything else that we do within the Warfare Center. The second is the Virtual Test and Training Center, and more specifically turn the Virtual Test and Training Center from what it is today into the synthetic range that we need for the pacing challenge. Like I said, we'll get a little bit of a chance to touch on that a little bit more here later. And then the third is revamping our advanced training enterprise in line with the things that you heard the chief talk about in his talk on Monday, those 5 key factors for culture change in our Air Force, reflecting all of those in our advanced training enterprise. So it's an honor to be here with you. I look forward to the conversation. Thanks, sir.
Well, great. Thank you all for those introductory background remarks. Let's dig into a little bit more detail with some questions. Now, the title of this panel is Air and Space Warriors Today and Tomorrow. And today, the vast majority of what Guardians provide is critical to enabling the success of U.S. warfighters inside the atmosphere. Tomorrow, there's going to be more fighting external to the atmosphere in the actual space domain. So, Governor first, but all of you feel free to chime in. How are you managing the evolution about the way Guardians are viewed, not simply as critical enablers, but as warfighters in and of themselves?
Yeah, sir, thanks. There's a couple pieces there. One, we're working hard on the warfighting doctrine. You know, we don't have the history of warfighting in space. We've never had a single battle in space. And so you think about how air power evolved, and we learned and we developed doctrine. We fought World War II. We learned and developed Vietnam, Korea. I mean, a long history there of lessons learned, applied and applied and applied. We're writing that 3.0 doctrine right now that we need to teach our warfighting, but it's, you know, how do we think about terrain in space? What are our centers of gravity? What are the most valued targets? How do we do intelligence collection? How do we disseminate command and control? All the things that the Air Force has a history on and proves dominant in since Desert Storm on for sure. We're back in the early days of the Air Corps Tactical School, and we're right there. And so as we onboard Guardians, and General Thomas is here as his team brings them into the service for us, early in their training, we want to incorporate those lessons. But first, we got to write the warfighting doctrine. And so there's a big effort going on right now for 3.0. We're developing exercises and war games to try out the things we think are true and prove them as concepts and eventually write them in. And so to develop that warfighter, we got to understand command and control. We got to understand what it means for space superiority in the domain, but also what's the most important thing for success in air, land, and sea. And so that certainly influences how we think about targets, how we think about high-value assets and things that we have to defend, and then train and exercise to prepare the force.
Very good. Either of you other two like to comment on that, or are we going to leave it to the space guy?
I would say we're all in the partnership, and you said Air Corps Tactical School, so we'll gladly give you some space at where Air Corps Tactical School started, which is at Randolph. All I would add really for everyone out here, and this is what I talk to folks about, right now I think is an incredibly exciting time to be in the air and the space forces. We are no longer getting after the same old problems, looked at slightly different ways that are very, I think have become rudimentary over time. We've got some wicked hard problems to solve. We got to solve them fast, and we're coming to America's best and brightest and our very intelligent airmen that are on the line who oftentimes have the ideas and the solutions or key components of those. So I've not been this excited about being part of the Air Force since I joined, you know, many, many years ago, a couple minutes ago, but I just think it's exciting.
That's a great segue to our next question. Professional military education is, as you alluded to, the bedrock for developing future leaders to be as lethal as possible in a fight. There's been some feedback from recent attendees that indicates that PME content may not be as focused on warfighting as it could be. Could you all talk about if there's an effort to increase and improve, refine our PME content to address this concern?
Yes, sir. I'll take that one. Great questions. Thank you for that. So all credit to General Hecker, COMU Safety now, but in his under his tutelage and command of Erie University, that feedback was heard. They took a pretty formal look at that, and in the last year or so, redesigned the Air Command Staff College syllabus and the Air War College syllabus to focus more on joint warfighting. So 60% of the syllabus now is aligned with joint warfighting with the particular adversaries in the NDS in mind. The bulk of that, again, being with the PRC. This academic year, it's under full execution. We've got it dialed in. General Tullis now has it dialed in for a quick assessment, in-stride assessment, and adjustments to that. Some key components of that are the ability to basically, there's a series of wargaming events that go on, so they're looking at how they use gamification, if you will. And each of the semesters, each semester formally ends with a war game environment with a OP4 or Red Force versus Blue Force kind of approach to it to evaluate what the students and the cadre thought would work or not is actually going to work in that way. They've also changed some of the staff to bring more military uniform members back onto the faculty versus relying so heavily on civilian PhDs and academia, if you will, get to war fighting. So those in and of themselves, I think, are very exciting. The next turn on that is at the Enlisted Corps PME, so NCO Academy, as well as the Senior NCO Academy, about helping them understand how to be critical thinkers and leaders at the NCO level, and threading the needle with the why, the objectives, how to defeat the PRC and how they contribute to that. And again, back to the multi-capable airmen and the concept. So we're going to have a good turn on the wheel of that this year coming and get that rolled out. So it's going to be cross-cutting across the board for all the PME sources there.
Yeah, for the Space Force, we have clear guidance from the boss, from General Raymond, in the planning guidance to develop independent PME for the Space Force. Vossler NCO Academy came over, so we're running Senior NCO and NCO Academy within the Space Force right now, and developing new curriculum taught by Guardians. But we always start with what we got from the Air Force, and we're grateful for that. I think ID and SDE, we're getting real close to final on some announcements and where we're going to go with ID and SDE. We're working some new partnerships. We will continue to send folks to Air War College, Navy War College, Army War College. We're required to do that for both those systems. I think that where we're going, the next big challenge is what do we do for the captain's course, as we call it. And when I think about PME, it's really, there's things I learned at War College that really I wish I had learned as an 03. Early in my career, especially the joint planning process and how we interact with joint forces. I learned some of that the hard way in deployments, just having to figure it out, but I think that evolution of early PME will be real important for us on what makes an operator successful as they transition, from an operational unit into that next level of operational command and control or on a combatant command staff. And how do we take a little bit more of the joint education and move that earlier in the career rather than my experience, which was later in the career. But at the same time, we'll keep strong partnerships with AU and with the Army and the Navy as well as we bring in inter-service transfers. They'll start showing up as instructors, and they'll bring that flavor to the Space Force, their service culture, and ultimately this will come out with our own thing, I think, within a short amount of time for the Space Force.
I'd suggest that this is a pretty exciting time for all the things that you both said. I had the opportunity to meet with the ACSC Commandant just prior to this session, Colonel Barry, and it was fascinating to hear the change in the curriculum and turning ACSC into the Air Power School. So I think, like you said, Smokey, lots of changes that came down the pike, and they're now being realized. Basket, here's one for you. It's becoming evident that we may not be able to have a full-up modern multi-domain flight replication with fifth-generation aircraft, space systems, and so on, the same way we did at Red Flags when I flew in them 40 years ago. The airspace is too constrained. Our enemies are always watching from overhead systems, and achieving realistic numbers of adversaries is challenging. So what's the progress in building joint integrated training centers that will allow us to overcome these physical constraints so we can exercise in a realistic fashion against peer adversaries?
Yeah, thanks, sir. Appreciate the question. I think you've characterized the challenges quite well. Hopefully we'll get a little bit of a chance to talk about what we're doing in relation to those challenges in the live fly arena, but certainly in the synthetic arena. And for those that aren't familiar, the Joint Integrated Training Centers are by name mentioned in the Joint TAC Air Synthetic Training Analysis of Alternatives that was a joint requirements document that came out a couple of years ago. And specifically what they highlighted was the need for a single site location to get the kind of high-end advanced tactics test and training that we need for the pacing challenge. HEAT 3 is the acronym there. So at Nellis, I mentioned before, it's one of my priorities in this seat. What we're doing is transitioning the virtual test and training center that exists today, which is really a collection of proprietary platforms that are a legacy in nature, and transitioning that campus of about 4 existing facilities into a capability that has a few key attributes. The first is that it'll be on the Joint Simulation Environment backbone. The Joint Simulation Environment is the synthetic environment that's being used to support F-35 IoT and E. The second is single site, high fidelity, low latency, physics-based, and that is all resident in the government-owned JSE capability. The third is integrated by design, not only across multiple domains, but also across our partners, and particularly our key partners of Australia and the UK, in addition to the Navy there. So all of them have space in the design for this campus there on Nellis. And then the last is an integration of capabilities that one might expect in a multi-domain world to see on night one of a fighter, all represented there, so that we can get the kind of high-end training that we need to do in the synthetic environment. That's the first instantiation of a joint integrated training center concept within the Air Force. I think there's plenty of opportunity and conversation for more like that to be planned for the future. Thanks, sir.
Well, I had a follow-up for you, but you answered that, so I'm not going to ask it. We'll move on to Governor. As the Space Force grows, it's got direct hiring authority to fill billets. Does this help the Space Force recruit the talent that it needs to fully stand up the force? And what other work needs to be done to ensure that the Space Force gets the talent that's required to focus on that warfighting in space that you talked about?
Yeah, sir, thanks. I'll tell you, the great thing about being a very small service is there's more people that want to come join us than we have positions for. And so it's really in the pool that wants to come into the Space Force, identifying the right talent. We're doing some direct commissioning pilot programs, folks coming in from industry with, in the first instance, cyber skills who can come in anywhere from a first lieutenant to a lieutenant colonel. And so we're experimenting with that. We're heavily civilian. 50% of the force is civilian, and so we're using some new civilian hiring authorities to bring in talent, and then of course the recruiting team is out there finding the best folks for us every day. We'll continue. You know, the Space Force is doing a lot of things on its own, but it's doing a lot of things with help from the Air Force, like I said. And so, you know, Air Force Academy, ROTC, Air Force Recruiting Service continue to serve both the Air Force and the Space Force, and we're not. Those are areas where I don't think we'll ever go our own way. It doesn't make sense to do that. We're just too small, and so I think we rely on the recruiting team out there for sure, but also, you know, Academy admissions. We got the detachment up at the Academy. Cap Greenwood's here, working hard to explain then to cadets on here are your opportunities, both, you know, within the Air Force, but also within the Space Force. If you're interested in space, cyber, intel, acquisitions, engineering, you know, come join the team. And so far, it's been a successful enterprise. We're bringing in top talent, and we'll just get better at it, sir.
Very good. Smokey, the Air Force has faced a pilot shortage for many, many years now. Even with crewed, uncrewed teaming on the horizon, we're still going to need experienced pilots in the cockpit. What are some of the things that AETC is doing to recruit the talent that we need to fill this and resolve this pilot shortage?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for that, sir. So, complex answer to a simple question, but what I would say is the pilot career, just like any career track, but it's got three major segments with it, right? There's the production of pilots, then there's the absorption of pilots when they move out to their respective gaining C MAGCOMs that they're going to fly for, and then there's the retention aspect. For the production aspect, we're doing, I think, very strong work on the recruiting side. The AIM High Academies, for example, trying to get to young men and women in our country that have expressed aviation, interest in aviation. And you can see that as simple as air shows. And, you know, and General Minahan and I think he hooked this young man, this young lad, I'll say, at the Andrews Air Show. You know, Seth was his name, 6 years old, but clearly he wants to fly. And so we spent time talking to him, and ultimately with his mother and grandmother too. And he could see, you know, took photos with us and things of that nature. And just venues like that. The AIM High Academy is another one where we take, you know, folks that can go with mentorship from uniform-wearing instructors in the summer period where they go out junior ROTC or with the Civil Air Patrol or a contracted flight school and get some rides in some aircraft, some academic instruction to understand aviation better and get an understanding that they can actually do it and get exposed to it. Those are some of the examples there. Within pilot production, 19th Air Force has spent a lot of great work and effort refining UPT to 2.5, which soon will be known as just UPT once it goes fully operational, and get away from the nomenclatures that we're using that we have now. But the ways we can tailor the pilot training toward the skill sets and the track that they're eventually going to go on. So we have Accelerated Path to Wings. We have the Air Mobility Fundamentals course. We have the, in development now with the Fighter Bomber Fundamentals course, now that we understand how to do competencies-based syllabus development and work backwards to design the syllabus itself, some aspects of that nature. But I think it's critical, back to my data point in my opening remarks, we have got to see all of this as a system and understand what each one of those different lines or lanes of effort in production add, and then the retention. We can't push pilots out the door to AMC, ACC, AFSOC that can't be absorbed or experienced at the rate that we need them to be experienced. And there's lots of factors that contribute to that experiencing. There's logistics pieces, there's sustainment from the weapon systems, sustainment portfolios, wear and tear on engines, the amount of manning that you actually have, where the flying hour program is, how that's resourced. So we're working to understand that as a system of systems in each of the phases and how we make that as smooth as possible so that our airmen that are going in that track can get through in the way that they can. UPT 2.5 in and of itself will allow us to meet the Air Force's standard goal by a little bit. It doesn't allow us to account for uncontrollables in attrition, which would be weather events that are significant, hailstorms, winter storms that are unexpected in some places where they don't normally occur, for example, or the oftentimes, or seldom, but impactful maintenance thing that pops its ugly head from time to time with an engine or aircraft component. So the challenge before us now is we're resourced, planned to produce at the number the Air Force would like us to achieve. We've got the things that we can control to get there. Now we're just working through how we just refine and understand what's actually happening in the system and smooth flow it as best we can.
Yeah, just to follow up a bit on the UPT 2.5, you've given us a bit of insight there. What are some of the challenges that are faced in moving from this traditional training approach into a more modern approach?
That's great. So I think the biggest challenge would be cultural. It's a new way of training. I've had it, other peers that are our age say we don't understand it. It's not how we came up, so they don't understand it. And frankly, if you hadn't gone through UPT in the last 4 years, you don't understand it because you haven't experienced it, is what I would say. But really, a lot of goodness has come out of it. The innovation, the use of immersive training devices and what they can contribute to advancing learning, the use of virtual reality and augmented reality. I was at Laughlin Air Force Base about a month ago, and in the B flight, T6, and just by chance, a student was talking about he'd gone out and done some acro in the T6, and his comment was, hey, when I was upside down in the Cuban 8 and looked above through the top of the canopy for the ground references, it looked just like it looked in the immersive training device. So they're confident, more prepared, and we're actually able now to work some of the agility of mind, if you will, where they no longer step out from the briefing desk with the set profile that you're going to fly. Because they've had the ability to do the reps and sets and get through the cognition piece and the process and procedures, rather, there's more agility, and the instructor will mix up the profile or add something, subtract something if based on the student's performance, and they're expected to be able to adjust to that. So those are some of the good things we've seen come out of it. Now we want to leverage that technology, those different approaches, and expand it to the rest of learning and how we deliver content.
Very good, thanks.
Yeah, sir. I think we can learn from you there a little bit because right now in the Space Force, you don't fly a spacecraft until you show up at your first ops unit, and we're trying to understand the value, how to place a value on virtual simulated training versus live training. Do we need to move more live training earlier in the training pipeline? Certainly, the one place that happens is at the Air Force Academy where they're flying the Falcon Sat program, but we're trying to sort of find that right balance. Sounds like the Air Force is moving more into simulation. I think we need to move a little bit more towards live training, but how you do the value proposition of which one is better at what point in a career, I think is something we can learn from you guys.
Absolutely, happy to work with you on it.
Basket, many of the folks in the room today have been or will go to a red flag. It's been the cornerstone for our warfighters to get realistic combat training for a long time. 2021 saw space and cyberspace deliberately built into red flag. So moving forward, what can you say about how we better integrate space and cyberspace into red flag? Or would it make more sense to host an independent space red flag at Nellis or elsewhere?
Thanks, sir. I'll blitz through a long answer to a short question on that. First, I think it's good to pause just for a second. You mentioned red flag. 1975, the first time red flag happened. Over the years, the thousands of airmen that have been impacted by that exercise, it's really hard to measure, but that happens because of the folks that make it happen. The 414 CTS currently doing that at red flag, and it's a great team there. I'll talk just briefly about the things that we're doing to adjust red flag that will reflect your question. First is that out of the 3 red flags we execute every year, 2 of those are specifically in relation to the pacing challenge. So the folks that come to red flag at -1 and -3 can expect to see nothing but the pacing challenge threat as replicated by our aggressor nation forces, the best that we can get on that. Having the 350th Spectrum Warfare Wing as a part of the Warfare Centers is incredibly huge there for the spectrum dominance piece of what that means for advanced training. Another one is the fact that we're expanding the airspace. So not just the NTTR, but portions of the Utah Test and Training Range, restricted area 2508 at China Lake, which gives the geography a little bit more representative of the pacing challenge. The third aspect is pulling in, and this gets back to the 5 key elements that the chief talked about on Monday, elements of high tactical, low operational C2, A staff, ACE into our red flag events and integrated warfighting and the importance there. And then last, which will get directly at the question, is we've started, the weapons school is leading the way on this, doing vols out over the water, Whiskey 291, airspace that's off the coast of California, about 200 by 600 miles, full integration with the Navy, both blue and red, on the surface and the air. And that, because the weapons school is leading the way there, Gov Squadron, the 328th Weapons Squadron, which is our space weapons school squadron, fully integrated into that event, as well as the 32nd Weapons Squadron, which is our cyberspace professionals in the weapons school. So that integration, templating that, bringing that over to red flag, what we're seeing there in over water execution is really going to be important here as we move forward. The specific answer to your question, sir, I don't think it's an or, I think it's an and the work that Gov is doing in his Skies series of events, I think is a great follow-on to that.
Yeah, sir, I'd just say real quick, we are putting a couple Guardians back into the 414th. We kind of, pulled a lot of folks out of Nellis, and we'll always go back there. We're staying at the weapons school, of course. We're putting a couple Guardians back into the 414th to maintain that tie, right? Space support to enable air superiority. The Sky Series is all about space superiority. Black Skies is going on right now for the first time. It's an electronic warfare live fire exercise. Red Skies next year, orbital warfare live fire exercise. We're excited about all these things, where we're going with the force.
Sir, if I could piggyback on that, this work is probably underway if I were a betting person, but with regard to where we're going with the Air War College and the ACSC, we've got to get the wargaming piece that incorporates these other domains, which is going to raise it to a higher classification level. The only way we're going to deal with the PRC quickly in the ways we want to is either via the speed of light or the speed of sound. And these 2 domains are getting there first, and then after that comes the speed of sound, which is the rest of the Air Force.
Very good. Real quick follow-up for Basket. Air Force Warfare Center is well positioned to support the development, testing, and training of collaborative combat aircraft, or CCA, that you hear the Secretary talk about. Is there a plan for embedding government and industry technologists with the warfighters out at the Weapons Center to do this kind of work?
Thanks, sir. We're closely following the work that's being done, the operational imperatives there, in line with Frag Job, who's at ACCA 589, and then Dale White as the PEO there. So we're closely tied into that, and I think there's a great future there within the Warfare Center for those efforts.
Okay, well, very good. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of this session. What I'd like to do is thank each of our panelists for being here today, and for all of you in the audience for taking the time to come and listen. And so with that, have a great aerospace power kind of day. Thank you.